Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. 7 days free, can't go wrong. Go learn the essential people skills you need to succeed. And where I want to focus at this moment is communication skills. Now, almost all the courses and episodes touch on communication. We do also have Communications 101. I encourage you to check out Habitly and improve the way you communicate to other people and receive their communication. The reason I focus on communication is because our guest today, Matthew Stibbe, has been a writer for over 20 years. He's a marketing expert. He runs articulatemarketing.com in the UK, and he's going to give us a writing lesson today. It's fabulous. I love it. 30 minutes with Matthew and me, and you're going to leave a better writer. Let's dive into this podcast. Matthew, great to have you on the show. It looks like by your background, you are like expert copywriter, marketer. You're also a wine enthusiast, and you are an awesome boss. So I don't know how you juggle all this stuff, but why don't you let the audience know a little bit about what your background is and what you'd like to talk about today.
David, thank you for having me on the show. So I run Articulate Marketing, which is a small but beautifully formed, perfectly formed marketing agency here in the UK. And we specialize in content marketing, inbound marketing, copywriting for technology companies. And I've been doing that for more than 20 years now. So that's where I'm coming from. And in your intro, you kindly mentioned that I'm an enthusiast for wine, and it just brought the quote into my head from Ernest Hemingway, I think, about writing. He said, "Write drunk and edit sober."
Well, he was very successful if that was his approach. So
worked for him. Yeah. I have to say, I don't do that if any of my clients are listening.
Well, that's great. I actually do a lot of writing myself. And I think for our audience, it's one of the big struggles that they have to do. And if I'm understanding you correctly, your firm focuses on content marketing. So that's all the more important that you have to write articles that have value to the reader versus our fluff or our too salesy. So,
and that is you put your finger on something tremendously important, I think, about the work that we have to do. Most of our clients just want to talk about them and their products. And of course, the readers want information and insights that help them with their problems. And somehow our job is to sit in the middle, sort of understanding our clients, what they make, what they sell, why it's important, why it's good, why it's helpful, and then translating that in some intelligent way so that we're talking to readers about their problems and their needs and their hopes in their language. And this, I sometimes think of our job weirdly as like being a bit of an ambassador from, planet client to planet reader, and sometimes from planet reader back to planet client. And I sometimes find myself explaining to somebody, yes, I know you want to talk about your super duper database or your super duper piece of technology that you've spent years inventing, but most of the people out there who are going to buy it, that's not the thing they're interested in. You have to earn the right to talk about your product in your language. So that there's a little bit of a communication piece in what we do. And marketing at its best actually is that. It's about communicating and helping people make better decisions.
Another thing that strikes me, because you're across the pond, so to say, is do you work with American clients and clients in other countries? Because that also creates cultural nuances in how you're writing.
Sure. Well, yeah. So clients of ours include Microsoft and Dell and Hewlett Packard Enterprise, big American companies. And sometimes, although we sometimes write for the American parent company, sometimes our job is to take American copy and anglicize it. And there's an old sort of sort of story about this that Americans like to be sold to, but English people don't. And we often find ourselves not only changing the spelling a little bit, anglicizing the spelling, but also dialing down the hype and the sort of hard sell. And then I had the wonderful experience a couple of times in my career of working for Scandinavian clients, a couple in Finland and a couple in Sweden. And they are to us in England as we are to Americans in that sort of, so they really don't want to see any hype and any sales language, and they want to make lots of space and be very respectful and very, and it's very interesting. So this is very much a communication choice and a calibration that you can make as a writer.
That's interesting. And so I'm curious about whether you might have any examples, kind of before and after type of stuff, that illustrate some of the common problems you see clients having trying to create this type of content that position themselves as the go-to company, or, hey, if we're going to buy that type of, to use your example, that type of database, we should at least check out this person's database because it sounds like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. And of course, we're doing this in a podcast format where most people are listening and the unlucky few are watching. Hello, you have to look at my face as well as hear my voice. I was thinking about some examples before, and I was thinking how to do that, as it were, on the radio. So I've come up with some short examples, which means and some very specific tactics or writing techniques to be aware of that might help. And I think the first thing that I would put my finger on is avoiding, or at least being very deliberate about, hype. You said sales language. So that sort of, it's the best, it's the fastest, end-to-end, cutting edge, solution, innovation, these kinds of words. And I remember editing a press release that had been sent to me, and press releases really are dire, awful examples of hype. And the opening sentence was, in order to demonstrate our commitment to cutting edge technology, innovation, and customer service, today we are launching the, widget 5000 or whatever it was. And I call this pious throat clearing, right? I mean, you don't need to say any of that. And it's sort of automatically, well, I can't imagine a technology company for whom those ambitions are not true, right? They have ambitions to be cutting edge, innovative, deliver customer service. They're not the most important thing in the press release. The most important thing in the press release is the story. So you can just cut that stuff out and really not use hype. And a chap called Jacob Nielsen, who is a guru of usability, runs a company called the Norman Nielsen Group, did pioneering work on writing and how people perceive it, particularly online. And he found that when you take away the hype language from a piece of text, curiously or unexpectedly, it actually makes it more memorable, more credible, and more readable, right? Now, wouldn't you like your copy, anything you write, to be more credible, memorable, and readable, right? Of course you would. And the example he gave, and you can, if you Google how people read online, you'll find this, Jacob Nielsen. He took a piece of text from, of all things, Nebraska's tourist office, and it begins like this: Nebraska is filled with internationally recognized attractions that draw large crowds of people every year without fail. In 1996, some of the most popular places were, and then there's a list of places. Okay. So he took that page and a half of sort of tourist attractions. Did you know that Carhenge is like the fourth most popular tourist attraction in Nebraska? I love the idea that there's like a Stonehenge made out of cars. Anyway, sorry, going down a rabbit hole there. So the first intervention that he made in this thing was, we're going to take all the hype words out. And then we're going to take all the, we're going to reduce the length of it by about 50%. And then we're going to make it easier to read. We're going to put bullet points and make it scannable. So the end result of this was the opening sentences. In 1996, 6 of the most visited places in Nebraska were Fort Robinson State Park, etc., Carhenge, and a few other places, right? And, it went from this to this and all this, and they tested it on people. They actually measured people's ability to recall and their belief in it and their interest in going to Nebraska and all this stuff. Shorter, less hype, more scannable, better copy, right? So just if you do nothing else with your copy than those things, you're going to automatically have an improvement. And if you avoid the pious throat clearing and saying nonsense stuff that is true of everybody, you're going to make your press releases better. So there is a couple, I've got more, but there's a starting place talking about this sales language.
Well, I think that's a great starting place because, quite frankly, I'm biased. I tell people often that I don't think people read anymore. They just scan. So you have to use bulleted lists. You have to use numbered lists. And bulleted lists may not work because then if they go to discuss it, they're saying, oh, this the fifth, sixth, the seventh bullet versus item number 7. And I say that all the time. And also that also plays into how people do PowerPoints and presentations if there's too much text on the screen.
Oh, well, look, let's get into presentations because this is another bugbear of mine, right? I years and years ago, a guy called Peter Norvig did the Gettysburg PowerPoint, right? So he took the Gettysburg Address, which is, in and of itself, beautifully concise and powerful and impactful. It's an amazing piece of writing. Again, but people won't be able to see this, but one of the slides was review of key objectives and critical success factors. Bullet point, what makes a nation unique? Dash, conceived in liberty, men are equal. Bullet point, shared vision, new birth of freedom, government of, for, by the people, right? So he's sort of taken this and sort of smudged it and smushed it into the writing style of PowerPoint. And I think this comes about because people read the PowerPoint slides a bit. When I was at university, I was at Oxford, and my tutor, I studied history there. My tutor said, among other things, you can use facts in your essays like a drunk uses a lamppost, right? For support or illumination, but not both at the same time. And I think when you're giving a PowerPoint presentation, you can use the slides for support or illumination, but not both at the same time. And my approach with slides is I talk, I'm giving the presentation. The presentation is the words out of my mouth. The sales pitch is the words out of my mouth. This is very important in our agency. The slides are there to give people something to look at, to give facts and data to support what I'm saying, and sometimes to emphasize visually or in words a key point. So I am fighting a constant running battle. In fact, before I came on this call, I was editing one of my colleagues' PowerPoints to get them to use fewer slides, fewer words on the slide, use the slide to support what you're saying. The presentation, the pitch, the proposal is the words out of your mouth. And I think, stop me if I'm going on too much, but this is a passionate point of mine. There was a guy called Guy Kawasaki, who has a blog and podcast and he reads, but he writes a lot. And I'm just, his book, The Macintosh Way, got me into business when I was in my early 20s. Anyway, he has the 10-20-30 rule for presentations, right? No more than 10 slides, no more than 20 minutes, and no text on the slides smaller than 30 points. Well, okay, it's a little bit ambitious, but I think a slide that has a really good short quote or a sentence or one number or a couple of numbers, I think being using the slides very concisely and working on what you're going to say more is the way to give better slides. And with that, one last point from me on slides, we like to use an app called pasteapp.com. And it's like PowerPoint, except without all the BS design stuff, right? You put your font in, you put your colors in, and basically you type things or you put pictures in, and it does all the formatting for you. You don't have to think about formatting. You think about what you want to talk about. It's phenomenal. Anyway,
Hey, well, I love what you say about illuminating or supporting, and then you went on to describe it. I just want to do a call out on that to the audience that's listening. So how you brought out that supporting is it's facts or it's data points, and illuminating is emphasizing or highlighting something. Did I get that right?
The one thing you're not doing is reading the wretched thing out to your audience, right? Looking at the slide going, and we think that. No. No,
the other thing that struck me with both the PowerPoint deck and then also when you talked about the press release that was so contrary, and particularly with the press release, is that my experience has been, and I've just been studying a course on this, the great writers, and this is especially, I want your opinion, but I expect it's especially true with copywriters. Great writers basically work from hook to hook to hook. And you start with a hook where you're grabbing the audience, and you don't grab the audience by pounding on your chest and saying, we're awesome, we're great, look at us.
Well, absolutely. My old editor, I was a freelance writer for a little while, and one of my editors said, you have to earn the reader's trust, interest, engagement with every sentence, with every page. The title, the stand first, the subheadings, the first sentences of each paragraph, it has to flow. And the wonderful journalist, Alistair Cook, now long gone, he said writing is the control of suspense, which is a slightly different way of looking at it, but kind of answering the reader's questions in the right order while tantalizing them to ask the next question, right? I understand that, but now I'm curious about the next thing and the next thing. That there is a craft to writing. The best book on this, by the way, if anybody wants, to really get to grips with the slog and the grit of being a writer, is Writing to Deadline by Donald Murray. I just strongly recommend that to anyone who's interested in writing. He was, I think, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist in Chicago. Fascinating book. Anyway, yeah. So that engagement is very important.
Yeah, and I love what you said, and maybe I have it wrong with Alistair Cook. Did he say the rhythm of writing? What did he say?
It's about the control of suspense.
The control of suspense. And then what the audience can't see that's listening is you moved your hand up and down. And what I was just listening to in these, I'm listening to actually a training by the Duffer Brothers who wrote Stranger Things, the Netflix TV series. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the hooks, and then they talk about how when you're writing, you can't keep things at the same pace all the time, which is what the hype people do. They hype. And what they say is, you got to have a period, some of your sentences or context is high energy, a lot of things happening. They're on the edge of their seat, but then you also got to slow it down. Yes. and backfill with information or whatever. And then you can hype, you got to have a flow to it. So talk to me about that, your experience there or thoughts.
It is a little bit like fiction. I mean, my world is nonfiction, right? I've tried writing a novel and failed dismally, but the same thing sort of happens. And I think at school we're taught some rather dull structures for managing communication. So, the old version of this is say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said, right? And then maybe you get a little bit more sophisticated, and maybe you start writing like a newspaper, journalist. So you start writing with the pyramid, and you've got your sort of 1 paragraph version of the story and then the 3 paragraph version of and you're sort of slowly unpacking the detail. But the idea being you could have the first column on the first page of the newspaper, and you'd get enough of the story. Then you'd turn to page 2 and there'd be another 3 columns, and they would be able to unpack it. But actually, and especially this is true now when people are reading online and they're reading in snippets and bits, and you have to sort of get them to scroll, you have to get them to click to the next thing. You need to be thinking like the Duffer Brothers. You need to be thinking about, like, how can I end this paragraph on a cliffhanger and get you to read the next thing?
That's right.
So I'm a very interested in how we arrange things. So structures like listicles, even though it's such a cliche, 10 things you didn't know about Stranger Things, but it helps the brain, the reader's brain, just sort of process that information, or, how to do something step by step, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are things that in the internet age actually allow people to process the information and scan through. But also, I think writing for the web now, you have to be really careful to signpost things for people. So I like, if I can, to put a little stand first, which is like in a magazine, there's the title and then there's a little introductory paragraph on a web page. And is that the thing I'm looking for? Am I going to get that? When you see this now a lot on Google, it's grabbing the first paragraph and just that's the answer to the question. So, my other tip about how you structure things is really good use of subheadings. People don't put enough subheadings into things, but kind of use the subheadings to signpost the story for people. So when people are just scanning down and quickly reading, if they just read the title, the stand first, and 3 or 4 subheadings, they're still getting enough information out of it. You're encoding the information in multiple layers in the story.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. So really, and rather than signpost, I would use the term headline, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
So you got to have a good headline, but I like the way you've clarified it, that it may not be a real heavy hook, but it'll be something like, I want to learn how to do X. And you say, and your headline is how to do X, or it's 10 ways to do X. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons I really like what you're saying about these subheads or small paragraphs is if I Google how to do X, I might get, at least 7 different articles that say 10 ways to do X, 17 ways to do X, 27 ways to do X, 54 ways, 101 ways to do X. And really, I find that when I read what you're talking about, that supporting text, it may convince me to look at the one that's only, one of the lower numbers versus thinking more is better. Because a lot of times when I go into the more is better, it's not better, it's garbage. But if you give me a good paragraph that tells me, oh yeah, this is really going to get me what I want, I'm going to click on you first.
Yeah. Well, when I say signposting, what I'm really talking about is navigation, helping the reader find their way through the story and get a synopsis of the story from the subheadings. It's an interesting thing with headlines and subheadlines. The internet has made us all write incredibly prosaic, descriptive headlines, and nobody writes sort of fun, quirky, playful ones because you want to really communicate very loudly what this paragraph is about, or what this section is about, or what this article is about, and that's beginning to be a bit of a lost art, the witty headline, but they also work. And Donald Murray, he had this idea that you should write, and he would say 50 leads. So the first sentence of your article, or the first couple of sentences, I would say write 50 headlines. If you start writing something that way, by the time you actually get to write the rest of it, you've really processed what it's about and all the different angles you can take. And you've come up with a beautiful, beautiful headline or a beautiful lead to start your piece with. I have to say 50 is probably a bit too much work, but he got a Pulitzer Prize, so he probably knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So this has been great. So do you have any other tips for us today? Because I feel like I'm in class, but it's like, this is really interactive and this is great. No, I love it. For me, I'm type A. So it's like, you're giving me high value. I mean, this is great, and confirming you are the expert that your years of experience, indicate that you are. So this is a blast. What else you got?
I'm doing probably what my wife would call mansplaining. So apologies for anyone who's finding this. I got a couple of quick win tips for anyone who just wants to make their writing a little bit better easily. Okay, and this is true for me with 20 years experience, and it's true for somebody writing a school essay. It works for everybody. And they're kind of obvious, but okay, so here goes, rapid fire. 1, short words are best, right? Churchill said that. And he also had a Nobel, well, he didn't get a Pulitzer, he had a Nobel Prize for literature, apart from saving civilization. So short words are best, but old words, when short, are better. I think that's paraphrasing slightly. And I'll give you an example of why this works. A guy called Daniel Oppenheimer, about 15 years ago, did a research in Stanford, and he published an article, "The Consequences of Erudite Vernacular Utilized Irrespective of Necessity." In other words, problems using long words without needing to. So find short words, use, not utilize, now, not currently, try, not endeavor. The Plain English Society has got a beautiful, beautiful 30-page list of short alternatives. Short words, go for the short words. It doesn't make you look big and clever to use long ones. Secondly, I already talked about using fewer words, and Jacob Nielsen absolutely proved that using cutting the word count in half made your text more readable, memorable, and credible. So short words, fewer words.
Let me ask you a question on the fewer words. So one of the tricks that some people use, and I'm curious whether you think it's good or not, is you use shorter words, but when you want to elaborate, then you have a link out to a document or a guide or another article that dives in deeper, because you feel some people in the audience may be interested in that, but the majority just wants kind of your main points.
Hyperlinks are your friend. I love hyperlinks. It's the best thing that's happened to writing since Gutenberg, in my opinion. Other people disagree, and I was having this argument with a client today, and she was saying, why have you put all these links in my blog posts? Aren't they just distracting? And I said, no, they add value for the reader. They add credibility for what you're saying, because you're providing sources, and they help with SEO. I mean, what's not to like? Okay. And if you don't want to click on them, don't click on them. They're not mandatory.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. And I love what you said about short words. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm pretty good at understanding words, but there's some big words I can spell, but I don't really know the meaning that deeply. And when I run across them in literature or other things I'm reading, it makes me pause. It interrupts my thoughts. I'm thinking, what does that word mean again?
Yes.
And that kind of wastes my time.
It's not only that, or not even that. I mean, certainly in the UK, the average reading age is probably around 13, 14, 15, which is why the popular newspapers are written by very clever people using very short words and short sentences. But there's also, they've tested this exhaustively, even with people, populations of academics or engineers at Boeing. And, whoever you are writing for, short, concise text makes you look more intelligent. And it's easier to read, and it's easier to remember, and it's more credible. Now, on what planet do you want to be not those things when you're writing? It's just, and yet people try and sound big and clever, and I'm going to use long words. And so this brings me on to another little tip that bakes my noodle. Okay. The passive voice, right? So people who want to sound big and clever use these very convoluted sentences. Long sentences are used by people who want to look clever, right? They're reversing that polarity. And a really good example of this is, right, the mat was sat on by the cat. And your brain has to kind of unravel that. Whereas the cat sat on the mat is like Dr. Seuss. So hard to read, easy to read, right?
Oh, yeah.
An easy way to detect a passive sentence is if you can add the words "by zombies" to the end of it, it's probably a passive sentence, right? So mistakes were made by zombies, right? No, you need a subject. You need to say, somebody made a mistake, or we made a mistake, or mistakes, who did it? It's who did it is missing with that. So the passive voice. And if you have an app or a tool like the Hemingway app or Grammarly, or indeed in Microsoft Word, switch on the thing that detects passive sentences. And when it says that's a passive sentence, rewrite it. It's the easiest bit of writing improvement you'll ever do, and it will make anything better easier to read.
Fabulous. Is that the like your 3 quick steps, or?
I could go on, but those are my 3 quick wins for anybody who's writing. Right. I have a little bit I'd like to say if you've got another minute.
Go for it. This is great.
Let's start with rhetorical devices. Right. This is advanced writing, but I think it's actually quite fun. So if you Google rhetorical devices on the internet, you'll find all kinds of libraries, and it's worth just reading through them and seeing examples of how great writers and great speakers have created sentences that are memorable, right? Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So things, famous quotes from the past, like ask not what your country can do for you. I'm misquoting it now. Let me give you a much better quote. Churchill. No,
you were on with JFK there.
Sorry, yeah, I know, but I misremembered the quote, and then
it was close enough where it's
close enough. Yeah. Ask what you can do for your country, but that's a very rhetorical structure to it,
right?
And the one I love is never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. And I read this, and this came to mind today when I was thinking about it, because our idiot Prime Minister Boris Johnson was at the Farnborough Air Show last week, and he was talking about the same subject. He said, it was 85 years ago that my grandfather was flying Wellington bombers with equipment so primitive that you really have to marvel at the bravery of men and women who were involved in that war. Okay, now that's a pretty big write-off of the Second World War. In fact, he used up quite a few Wellington bombers. He crashed twice, the second time into a church. So Churchill, incredibly elevating, memorable, rhetorical sentence. Boris Johnson, fatuous, self-important joke, undermining joke. And I think using rhetorical devices very carefully. I think you said that actually earlier, and I think this is a really good point that you made. This sort of rhythm to writing where you can maybe be a bit factual for a while and a little bit low-key or have a bit of humor, and then use a really well-crafted sentence to make an impact. Yeah. I'm getting excited now, so I'm going to also take a little calming pause. Let you speak.
Well, I think that as far as your prime minister, part of the blame, if not, is the speechwriter, and part of the blame is that the speechwriter is being influenced by your prime minister, and we don't know, which one's which. Yeah. Ronald Reagan was the great communicator for a lot of us. He had an incredible thing that I love, was that he was friends with people on both sides of the aisle, even though they really disagreed on many issues. And he could communicate and have dialogue. And politics in the U.S. now is an indication of terrible communication, terrible writing. It is a lot of hype.
Yes.
And we could spend, all day talking about our disappointments there.
Let's not. But
let's not. I totally
interesting
agree.
Thing to unpack about Ronald Reagan, which I think he genuinely was a great communicator, and he honed his craft not only as an actor. Okay, he wasn't a particularly profound or charismatic actor, but he was an actor, and there's a talent to do that. And I was married to an actress for years, so I know how much work it is actually. But then he was a spokesperson for General Electric for years, and he would go out and make the case for fundamentally for American capitalism, for a long time. And I think he came to the White House. Everyone sort of rather wrote him off, perhaps as he was not intellectually deep, shall we say? But he had a lot of communication skills, and he had worked hard on them. And that's probably the best advice I can give anyone: is be deliberate and conscious, and aim to improve your communication, your writing skills, and keep doing it. It's 20 years into my writing career. I'm still reading books about writing. I'm still trying to be a better writer, better communicator, and it doesn't stop.
I think, Matthew, this has been great. And I love writing. So I could learn so much more from you. I've learned some things today. I know this has been great for our audience. And if they want to learn more about what you do, or maybe the wines you like, which we did not get into, but the copywriting, tech marketing, whatever, or maybe your leadership stuff, but where do they go? Where can they find out more about you?
Well, at the risk of overwhelming you with 3 bullet points, all my work on writing, including podcast webinars rather, and videos about writing, are on articulatemarketing.com. And there are hundreds of blog articles there and all kinds of videos, and it's all free and there's nothing to be sold. Just go and enjoy. If you're interested in my random thoughts about leadership and technology and Lego and computer games, geekboss.com is where I write my personal blog. And the wine stuff, that lives on vincarter.com. But nobody goes there, so don't worry about that. Articulate marketing is probably where I'd send people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds great. I encourage everyone to check that out. And I thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great value for our audience.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Matthew, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. We'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned in. I've got more great guests coming. They're here, they're there, they're joining us, and they've got great insights for you. Bye for now.